listener production.
Hey, Chris Spear with you. Welcome to The Briefing. There's always someone trying to sell you something on social media, but it's not every day you'll be hit with a TikTok from the Church of Scientology.
I've never seen them do this before, directly trying to appeal to young people through TikTok or through a social medium. And the reason they're doing it is because they're dying. They're dwindling out. This is desperation stakes.
Our deep dive into Scientology's newest recruitment tactic in Australia is coming up in the second half of this episode. First, though, let's get into the headlines with Sacha Barbagat. It's Tuesday, the 18th of November.
Hey Chris, and to you listening, a man who attended that neo-Nazi rally outside New South Wales Parliament has had his visa cancelled by the federal government. Matthew Gruter, a South African national, moved to Australia around 3 years ago with his wife, according to social media. But Immigration Minister Tony Burke says it's time for him to leave.
If someone's intention is to tell Australian citizens that somehow they don't belong, that somehow they're not welcome, well, I'm sorry, mate, he's the one who can leave the country.
Gruter was one of 60 black-clad men from the National Socialist Network who held an anti-Semitic protest in Sydney a little over a week ago.
Multiculturalism is a big table, and every ethnic group gets a seat, except the white man who built this country.
When asked by 9 newspapers about his involvement in the rally, Gruter responded with, quote, "Since when is loving and advocating for your own people a crime?" And he's not the only one who's now facing the consequences of attending the racist event following a campaign by the Sydney Morning Herald to expose members of the NSN who attended the rally. A man who worked for Sydney Trains has been stood down, while a number of others have had their identities revealed, including a personal trainer, an ESL teacher and an IT worker who has been let go by his employer.
Yeah, so that's a big campaign that's happening right now with Sydney Morning Herald, and this has resulted in this man's visa being cancelled. Now, it is worth noting they can challenge a visa cancellation through the Administrative Review Tribunal or the court system, so it's yet to be seen whether Gruter is going to take that approach. But once a visa has been revoked, the holder does have a limited time to leave Australia on their own, or they will face deportation. Yeah,
and look, like you mentioned, this is still kind of somewhat up in the air. We don't know if this is the final decision that's been made, but this restores my faith in our system a little bit. You know, we're seeing all these neo-Nazi rallies popping up. We're hearing from the Electoral Commission that they can't strike neo-Nazis off our ballots come time for an election if they do, end up on our ballot. So, I've been feeling a little uneasy. History's taught us what happens when we let this message fester, especially in times of economic downturn. So, a good move, I guess, from Immigration Minister Tony Burke here.
Yeah, and speaking of the political side of it and what this group wants to do, we did deep dive this last Tuesday and we will pop that episode in our show notes. It's really worth a listen.
Opposition leader Susan Lee says her position is safe amid rumours of a leadership spill after turning her back on net zero, giving voters a quote-unquote guarantee that she will lead the coalition to the next federal election.
Can you guarantee to voters that the party will keep its first female leader until the next election?
Absolutely.
That was Lee on ABC 7:30 last night, being pressed on whether the Conservative wing of her own party, including Andrew Hastie, who many expect will challenge her leadership, is working against her. And when asked if she thinks Australians deserve to know what's really happening inside her party, this was her response.
I think people have a right to know what policies we're developing, how we're doing that in the interests of them, because we should be here and we are here in the interests of the Australian people.
So, really sticking to the policy talking points yesterday. She was out and about with her new energy policy, posing for pictures alongside a number of journalists holding that little booklet in her hands.
They love a booklet, don't they, Chris?
They love a prop. They really do.
Now, the opposition leader did actually join us on the briefing yesterday, Arvo, and Tash quizzed her on infighting within the party, specifically the moment she walked into Wednesday's party room meeting in a much smaller group compared to the Conservative pollies in her party, including Hastie, Angus Taylor and Jacinta Nampijinpa Price. Here's what she said.
I always find it a bit whimsical when the people who watch us from the outside say, well, that was funny. And Susan was walking by herself. I just got up from my desk, picked up my papers and said, right, guys, I'm just heading to the party room to get on with this energy meeting.
So that wasn't strategic?
Not at all.
Okay.
Yeah, so we know when politicians go into these meetings, they like to walk with their supporters. Now, while I'm sure the opposition leader wasn't, fibbing as such, it did send a message to the Australian people, and she would know that.
And those pictures, really, they did get a lot of circulation online. People are drawing the same conclusions as A lot of us journalists say now, look, leading moderates Maria Kovacic and Anne Ruston have rejected reports that the moderates are backing Andrew Hastien as leader over Susan Lee. So they've come out with a statement to say that, we overwhelmingly, in a majority, we moderate colleagues support Susan Lee's leadership. She was voted in 6 months ago and she will continue to be our leader. That will lead us to the election.
An Australian man who rushed Ariana Grande on the red carpet for the Wicked sequel in Singapore last week has been sentenced to jail time. Footage went viral of 26-year-old Jason Wen jumping a barricade, wrapping his arm around her and jumping up and down. Ari's co-star Cynthia Erivo quickly rushes to her aid in this footage before security steps in and takes him away, while hundreds of fans watch on.
Wen was arrested a few hours later and was charged with being a public nuisance. He'll spend 9 days behind bars after pleading guilty in a Singaporean court. The judge saying in his sentencing, "You seem to be attention-seeking, thinking only of yourself and not the safety of others when committing these acts." Now, Sash this morning waking up to news that he had been detained. I think he's 4 days into his sentence at the moment. I was like, yeah, great. This is a really good outcome.
Yeah, well, he's done this before. The judge was right in his assessment that he'd likely do it again as well. We've seen him jump the stage both at Katy Perry and The Weeknd's Aussie shows in the past. And Wen describes himself on Instagram as troll most hated in his bio. Yeah. He knows what he's doing. And I also do want to point out too, Ariana Grande, you might forget that there was a terrorist attack at one of her shows in Manchester and dozens of little children died. And she has spoken really publicly about her PTSD struggles with that. So you can imagine that while, she's very giving with her time, that would play in her mind, especially given she's talked about having PTSD around it.
More schools have been forced to close today as asbestos contamination fears continue to spread across the country. Students at 6 Catholic schools in Tasmania will be kept home after magic sand used in their classrooms was recalled by the ACCC. 3 other campuses are partially closed today, and this is the 4th state to be impacted, with the ACT, Queensland and South Australia also having to either close schools or issue hazard warnings for classrooms.
Yeah, and the concern with these sand products is that they contain a form of naturally occurring asbestos. However, the consumer watchdog has looked to assure parents that the risk to human health is low. Nevertheless, people who have the kinetic sand in their homes are being told to stop using it immediately, secure it in a doubled up heavy-duty plastic bag and take it to an authorised disposal facility. And you can check the ACCC's website for a full list of impacted products and the stores that sold them.
And it's that time of the week we would ordinarily be joined by someone from Listener's investigative podcast series Secrets We Keep to tell us about their latest story. It was meant to be friend of the show Joey Watson, but he's dead asleep and has decided to send us a voice note instead. Now look, Joey's been telling some insane stories from his network of sources all around the world, and today is from inside an undercover operation in Europe.
Hey, Chris and Sash. So last year, when I was working in Vienna, I was introduced to a private investigator, and I didn't know it at the time, but over a few White Russians, he told me how he'd orchestrated an undercover operation on the Spanish party island of Ibiza that only a few years before we met had brought down a far-right government. It's a crazy story. I hope you like it.
You know what I do like, Joey? The way that you pronounce Ibiza. I really did enjoy that.
It's accurate. He's doing it accurately. I also like that he drinks White Russians, which is famously milk and vodka, which I cannot think of anything worse.
Yeah.
But pop off, Joey. That episode of Secrets We Keep Uncovered is out now. Have a listen. It sounds awesome.
And that is it for headlines for today. Coming up next is your deep dive, Sash, looking into Scientology's latest attempt to sign up young Aussies. Have a listen to that up next.
Since it first came to Australia in the mid-1950s, the Church of Scientology has been shrouded in controversy. It was actually banned in multiple states after an inquiry declared in 1963 that it was evil and a serious threat to the community. But those rulings were later repealed, and the organisation was formally recognised as a religion in the High Court in 1983. Fast forward a couple of decades and Scientology forced its way into the cultural zeitgeist via a number of very high-profile members, most notably Tom Cruise and John Travolta, and came to be parodied on shows like South Park.
Stan, do you want to hear the great secret doctrine of life behind Scientology?
Sure.
All right, go ahead and tell him.
All that is to say, the average Aussie's knowledge of Scientology is probably pretty limited and rooted in pop culture references. So it might surprise you to learn that the church is currently being looked at by an inquiry in Victoria, which is examining the harms caused by high-control religious groups, with calls by some for the religion to be declared a cult. Amid this, the church has started a TikTok account and is posting videos encouraging us to come check them out.
Have you ever wondered what's inside the Church of Scientology Melbourne? Well, come with me. We have hundreds of courses to help you in any area of your life, including helping your children with their studies. And you can come in and do a free personality test, which will spot any areas of trouble in your life, and you can find out how we can help you. All of you are welcome. Thank you for watching.
So is the church trying to rebrand amid some very serious allegations? And why is it targeting young Aussies through social media? Brian Seymour is an investigative journalist who has been following and probing Scientology for decades. Brian, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing today. Look, the church has earned a reputation as being, at best, a bit weird and, at worst, controlling and abusive. Following your years of investigating it, where do you think the religion actually falls on that spectrum?
Yeah, so about 20 years, 150 stories, and it's definitely a cult. It's not a religion. L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, actually said that verbally and in writing. So it's really not up for debate. It's destroyed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people over the 70-odd years that it's been around. And it continues doing that today right here in Australia.
Yeah, and we will get into that as we go on through our chat today. But I did want to talk to you about how Scientology has kind of become part of the cultural zeitgeist. Like, I think of South Park first and foremost and how they've covered Scientology, but also like Louis Theroux's done quite an incredible documentary which does expose what goes on in the church to an extent. But people's minds go to Tom Cruise and jumping on the couch at Oprah and things like that. How do you think it has become part of the cultural zeitgeist to the point where people might make a joke of it rather than think of it, as you've described it, as a cult?
Yeah, I mean, in 1955, L. Ron Hubbard, the founder, started the Celebrity Project, and he tried to recruit people like Walt Disney and Pablo Picasso and Orson Welles, a long list of celebrities, because he wanted these people to be walking billboards for his cult, Dianetics, which he then turned into Scientology. They really didn't get many celebrities. They had a handful. John Travolta was the biggest name they captured before he was famous in the 70s. And then Tom Cruise in 1986, when he met his first wife, Mimi Rogers, who was a Scientologist. Since then, they haven't really got any celebrities into Scientology. The celebrities they have, that people know today, like Giovanni Ribisi and Elizabeth Moss, were born into it. And that's the big problem for Scientology. They're dwindling out. Their membership is plummeted to less than 20,000, some say less than 15,000 worldwide. And Australia has always been one of the places in the world where they've had the strongest membership, even though it's only ever peaked at about 10, 20,000 people in the 1990s. And it's down to below 2,000 now. On the issue of it being a wacky, zany cult, that's what I first thought when I did my first story in 2007 on Scientology. And I wandered in there and they made me watch a film on Dianetics. They made me read about L. Ron Hubbard. They promised me an interview, reneged on that. So I went down there and interviewed them on camera anyway. And I was just struck by how uniform they all were in their dress, their manner, their speech. They answered every question with a question. They were very defensive, very secretive. And then I started looking into it and people started contacting me saying I was forced to have an abortion when I was in the Sea Org in Scientology. I know people, families here in Australia who are still trying to get in contact with their sons and daughters 35 years later. It's ongoing. The abuse doesn't stop. It never ends.
And that's why when I got fed this video on my TikTok For You page the other day on a completely innocent scroll, wasn't looking for anything, and a video popped up on my screen that was from a group called Scientology Melbourne, and they were telling me to come on down and check us out and have a look, and they were giving a tour of their church in Melbourne. What do you make of the church's foray into TikTok in 2025?
Well, this is extraordinary, and I'm so glad you brought it to my attention. I hadn't seen it either because I've never seen them do this before, directly trying to appeal to young people through TikTok or through a social medium. And the reason they're doing it is because, as I said, they're dying. They're dwindling out. This is desperation stakes. And the first thing you notice when you watch that young woman, who seems like a lovely person, I'm sure she is, I feel very sorry for her, inviting you to come in and have a look. They walk into the Scientology Centre at Ascot Vale in Melbourne, and the first thing you notice is it's completely empty. There is no one inside those orgs except the staff and the Sea Org members in there that they are exploiting. These are people who work 100 hours a week for maybe $30 a week. The Sea Org members live and eat and sleep communally. They are basically sequestered away from the broader community. They exist only to imbibe Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard technology, books, lectures, videos. That's all they do. And they're slave labor. Now, some people defend that as, well, these are dedicated ecclesiastical members of a religion. They're not. They sign a contract, and they include things like NDAs, agreeing never to sue the church, indemnifying them against any kind of legal action if they're sexually abused or assaulted or have a breakdown or have depression. I mean, it's just unlike any religion or any workplace in the country.
So, yeah, I guess that answers what my next question was going to be, was should we be worried that the church is not only just kind of having a go on TikTok, but that they seem to be targeting young people who maybe wouldn't be aware of the tactics that a church like Scientology might use? So what should people be on the lookout for then? Like, how would you know you're being targeted by them?
Yeah, it's a great question. In one of the videos, they show you an e-meter, which is 1/3 of a lie detector. And they claim this machine, which simply sends a current through two metal cones that you hold in your hand, can actually read your thoughts and measure the weight and mass of your thoughts, which is unscientific and untrue. But it's a really effective tool they use to convince people that their problems can be quantified on a graph and then solved by them. So if you find yourself doing a personality test or the Oxford capacity analysis, that's Scientology. So the first thing to look out for is the personality test, and any suggestion that their key phrase is that what is true is what is true for you. If you hear that or any iteration of that, run for the hills.
Do you think this approach, going on TikTok trying to lure in younger members, do you think it'll be successful in any sort of measure?
No, I don't, because it doesn't work. That's always been the problem with Scientology, that they peaked worldwide with about 100,000 members in 1990. They've claimed up to 11 million members, which has never been true. At the last census in Australia, it was less than 1,800. And yet they claim there are 250,000 Scientologists in Australia. What they try and do is get you on the e-meter. I always say, once they get you on the cans, they call them the cans, they've got you, because it's about putting you in a reverie state, a hypnotic state. And once you're in that state, you're very suggestive. And it gives you a high to come out of there saying, I've had a major realization. I didn't know that I was this special, amazing person. And then the high wears off and you want to come back in for another auditing session. I call it the nicotine of Scientology. And it's really about putting people in a reverie state, giving them a high, and then charging them. It's a subscription-based model of cult indoctrination. So it's never going to have a wide audience, but they don't need a wide audience. They have about 1,000 very wealthy donors, they call them whales, all around the world. One of their whales has given them over $350 million. So they rely on big earning, big donating whales and staff who give over their time and energy, basically free, to keep the ship sailing. But it is dwindling. They're finding it harder and harder, which is why they're turning to TikTok. And I just advise anyone thinking of going into a Scientology org, the story of Scientology is littered with the broken lives of people who've made that very same mistake. Don't do it. They don't care about you and your problems. They want to use you and exploit you. That's what they do.
Wow. Well, on that note, I mean, just quickly before we let you go, there is an inquiry actually happening right now in Victoria that's looking into high control religious groups in the state. Scientology has come up as one of those groups, and it's heard from a previous member who's detailed horrific allegations of mental and emotional abuse. What do you think needs to come out of this inquiry? It is just in Victoria. It's not going to be national laws or legislation. But what do you think the rest of the country can learn from what's happening in Victoria right now, and where should the future of legislation be in this space?
Well, I think it's a bit like the pedophile priest scandal in the Catholic Church. I mean, at the end of the day, people are free to hold their own religious beliefs. And I don't mock the religious beliefs of Scientologists because, as many people have pointed out, they're no more ridiculous than other mainstream religions when you actually look at them on paper. But it's really about what you do to people. It's not what you believe, it's how you behave. So if you're physically, psychologically, sexually abusing children and or covering that up or allowing it to happen, then you need to be held to account the same as anyone else would, regardless of your religious belief. And that's really the difference. One of the things this inquiry might do is differentiate between a cult and a religion. So a cult is generally a human founder, They do things like removing people from their support networks, isolating them from their families, exploiting them, coercive control. So there are criteria you can use to actually define in law what a cult is. And then really bringing the full brunt of the law on those groups, on those individuals, abusing people in the same way that you would if you were an abusive husband or someone who is controlling in a workplace and using trafficked labour from another country, which is also something that Scientology does. So I hope this inquiry, which is due to report, I think, September next year, comes up with some recommendations around treating Scientology as you would any other business or group that abuses and exploits people.
That was investigative journalist Brian Seymour speaking with me there. And that is all for this episode of The Briefing. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Sasha Barber-Gatt. See you next time.